connections people here. I thought Kevin had a bigger.
Sometimes they have a bigger group, but I mean they have a long list of people who are members. I think, but
Yeah, yeah.
she said you just don't know from week to week who's going to
What's
show
going
up.
to? Yeah, yeah. Well, John was just telling me that Jane Peck had a stroke on Tuesday or Wednesday, and
Yeah, I heard that. Um, somebody told me that at rehearsal yesterday.
okay, I had not heard that, so
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please grab your coffee and have a seat, and we're ready to begin. Welcome, Covenant class and Connections class. Covenant was expecting that Julia Watkins, the Davidson College chaplain, was going to be here this morning, but there was a scheduling conflict. And so Haley Todd said, well, come join us with our Connections group. We're going to have Alice and Donna speak to us. And we said, wow, thank you. So we now have the opportunity to hear Donna Hatfield and Alice Sudduth. Donna was the chair of the Green Group, our college's Green Group, for years, and Alice is the current chair. And their mission for our church is environmental stewardship. So we are delighted. So thank you, Haley and Connections, and thank you, Donna and Alice.
Well, thank you all for letting us come and speak to you all. I know many of you were probably involved in the early days of the Green Group, which I think started as a circle. And so you may know the history of the Green Group more than I do even. Not more than Donna, but I have a co-leader, Gordon Clark, who could not be with us today. He's very active with Davidson Lands Conservancy and Trees Davidson. Yesterday they had a planting at Hudson Place, planted, I think he said 14 trees, street trees in that neighborhood. And they are frequently seen around town on the weekends planting trees. But I'll tell you briefly about some of the things we've done in the past year. Last year, once a month, there was a walk somewhere in the area on a trail or a greenway in honor of the town, of the state year of the hike. And we had our year of the trail, and we had our year of the hike. And so some of you joined us on those walks, and those were well received by their participants. And another thing that was accomplished last year was a document about the use of single-use plastics. And Pam Dykstra was very involved with that, and I have copies of that document to pass out to you if you would like to see it. And we'll pass it out later. Okay. It has some good ideas it was aimed primarily at the committees of the church to think about how they use plastic and ways they could reduce the use of plastic. So I think there's several good links on this document that you can go to and learn more about single-use plastic and its the way it damages our environment. It's things that you can think about for your own personal use as well as ways the church is using plastic. This year we're hoping to do an event with the Davidson College Farm, and you'll be hearing more about that as we work on those plans. We also want to hear from the town and Davidson College about their efforts in sustainability. We'll be, again, letting you know more about that as the year goes on. I'll just offer a brief prayer before I turn this over to my friend Donna. Let us pray. God, help us as we strive to be stewards of your creation. Your creation is too wonderful, too ancient, too beautiful to be good, too good to be desecrated. Help us as we work toward restoring creation to the way it was intended by God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. This is Donna Hatfield. Most of you know her, and she will talk to you about Diet for a Small Planet.
Okay, thank you. Before I start with Diet for a Small Planet, I just want to bring your attention to the screen. That is the Earth Care logo, and we became an Earth Care congregation. We became certified in 2010, and it was at the initial suggestion of John Kirkendall that he had heard about this designation and thought that would be a good thing for us to do. So we filled out the paperwork and have been certified as an Earth Care congregation for these many years now. Earth Care strives to be ecologically conscious in the areas of worship, education, outreach, and facilities. And we have had to maintain that certification in all those 4 areas for all these years. I also want to tell you that on the church website, if you click on that Earth Care logo, it will take you directly to the Green Group page where you can find information about events that might be going on in the community related to green activities, and also information about things in the church, and just some tips and good ideas for living a greener life. So I just wanted to get that little plug in for our Earth Care. This discussion that we're going to have today was originally planned for a year ago. It was going to be like a book club discussion. We had asked people to read the book, and then they were going to meet on a Sunday afternoon, and I would lead the discussion. Well, some health issues in my family caused that to have to be postponed, and we finally, at the beginning of this month, held a lunch and learn event after church on Sunday here in this room, and had a small group, but it was a good discussion. We had a good group of people that came to that. So I've kind of reworked this a little bit because I know that a lot of you haven't read the book, and this was kind of a last-minute thing, so you probably weren't even expecting to have this discussion today. So I'm going to give background on the book first, and then we'll try to get into discussion and take questions from you. My interest in the book came out of a discussion in the Jubilee class a few years ago about the food delivery system in this country. And it was led by Steve Justice. And Steve mentioned that he became a vegetarian as a young man. And someone asked, well, why did you do that? And he said, I read a book. And it turns out this was the book, Diet for a Small Planet. And I thought, well, that's interesting. We maybe ought to look into this book a little bit more if it made that change in his life. And so the book itself has been in print for over 50 years, and it's been updated and new editions issued every 10 years or so. The author is Frances Moore LePay, and she graduated from college in 1966 and did a couple of years of community organizing work, and then went to the University of California at Berkeley to get a graduate degree in community organizing. So you can kind of, thinking about that period of time, those of us who were alive then know that that was a time of real turmoil. The Vietnam War was going on, and Berkeley was kind of the epicenter of the hippie culture and the people trying to stop the war and change the world. And Frances Moore LePay was one of those people who really and truly wanted to make the world a better place. And she kind of didn't know how to do that, like most of us don't today. But she figured that she had to decide what she really believed in and then go from there. And as she was working on this, she honed in on food as a possible solution to the world's problems. So the book started out as a one-page handout, which she was taking around and tacking on trees and buildings and doors on the Berkeley campus. And people really responded to it and encouraged her to make it bigger. And so it became a pamphlet. And then in 1971, she published the book, the first edition of the book. She decided that we all feel powerless. There's so many problems in the world, and we see this today as well. How do you get your arms around them? How do you figure out what you can do to make a difference? And she decided that one of the things that we all have control over is what we put in our mouths. We can choose what we eat. And so she decided to start from that perspective and see where she could go with that. And she felt like once we understand how the system works, then we can try to get into it and make changes. She found that while many people in the world are food deprived, including in this country, there's an incredible amount of waste in our food system in the U.S. She says that our bodies cannot even use half the protein we consume. Children need a lot of protein, but adults don't, and we eat far more protein than our bodies can even process. And she says it takes 16 pounds of grain or soybeans to produce 1 pound of meat. So this is part of what's happening here. Can you put the first slide up, John? These are hidden resources that she's identified that are plowed into our steaks. So water, it takes 2,500 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of steak. And this is not just the water that the cattle are drinking. This is the water to irrigate the soybeans and the corn or whatever they're feeding to the cattle. That all has to be counted in. So 2,500 gallons of water, that's a lot of water for 1 pound of steak. Soil erosion is another thing. The animal feed crops tend to cause more soil erosion than vegetable crops do, and we're losing topsoil at a great rate because of that erosion. The energy costs, she figured at the time the book was written, and I'm sure this is at least this much today, 1 pound of steak uses 20,000 calories of fossil fuel. And again, that is the tractors that plant the crops and harvest the crops. They have to have fuel. All of the processes, getting the cattle to the feedlot, getting them to the slaughterhouse, getting the meat to the grocery store, freezing it, doing all the processing that needs to go along. That comes to 20,000 calories per pound of beef. And just to give you an idea, a pound of beef gives us as energy roughly 1,000 calories. So we're talking 20 times the amount of energy needed to produce that beef as to what it actually supplies to our bodies. And then import dependency is the other thing. We are becoming in this country more and more dependent on foreign countries to produce our fertilizers and pesticides, chemicals, that sort of thing. So a lot of that stuff is coming from overseas, and we become dependent on other countries for that. She says that right now, we are killing our world to feed ourselves. And changing the way we eat will not change the world, but it may begin to change us, and then we can be part of changing the world. One of the things she found is that our food system has concentrated power in the hands of a few people. A small number of conglomerates control our food system. If you look at the labels on the food you buy in the grocery store, you'll see the same names coming up over and over. Companies own multiple different entities, and they all are controlled by the same people. We've come into a vicious cycle where farmers need to, in order to make enough money to keep their enterprise going, they have to grow more crops every year. But that involves more fertilizer, more energy for the tractors, more of everything, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And basically, small farmers can't compete in that cycle. We're losing small farms at a huge rate in this country, and these big ConAgra type enterprises are taking over all of our food production. She believes that we must work toward greater democracy to save our planet. Democracy for her, she defines it as the rules and norms which enable us to live together to meet our deepest needs, those needs being power, meaning, and connection. And then, John, if you'll do the next slide, she came up with her set of grounding principles. So, development must be the process of moving toward genuine democracy, understood as the ever more just sharing of political and economic power. Freedom from interference is only part of what democracy means. We must also have freedom to achieve what makes life worth living. The concepts of economic and political democracy are inseparable. To quote Louis Brandeis, we can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth in a few hands, but we can't have both. Democracy is not a static model to be achieved once and for all. It is an eternal struggle to maintain it. And the only way to redistribute power into many hands is for those who are powerless to take responsibility to make the important political and economic decisions in their society. The third part of the book looks at the way our diet has changed over the past few years. And John, if you'll go to the slide on a couple more. There we go. These are the dangerous changes to our diet. We're eating more protein from animals instead of plants, which causes higher cholesterol and osteoporosis. That osteoporosis thing kind of threw me. I didn't realize that. We're eating more fat, which leads to higher cholesterol and heart disease. We're eating too much sugar, which causes tooth decay and empty calories that are crowding out our needed nutrients. We're eating too much salt, which causes high blood pressure, too little fiber, which heightens the risk of intestinal diseases, too much alcohol, which leads to liver disease and automobile accidents, and more additives in our food, antibiotic residues and pesticides, and all of these increase the risk of cancer, and too many calories, and that leads to obesity. These changes have really become more profound during the 20th century. We've seen companies producing new foods, coming up with new things to sell to us. And part of the thing is, for instance, soft drink companies have taken over the snack food industry. So the more salty chips and pretzels you eat, the more soft drinks you want to drink. And that's another vicious cycle of selling us things that really are not good for us, and making that more a part of our daily diet. John, if you'll go to the food-related assaults, there we go. These are things that have arisen or grown worse in the last 50 years. This is in the updated version of the book. Vast hunger continues amid plenty. How we feed ourselves worsens climate chaos. Food becomes our biggest health threat. Hazardous materials contaminate our food and also contaminate the people who work the land. With no prior health and independent environmental testing, genetically modified organisms, GMOs, are present in at least 75% of U.S. processed foods. This, I know there's a big discussion now about GMOs, whether they're dangerous or whether we should allow them in our foods. Many other countries, the European Union regulates GMOs very highly, and that's, they have decided that that is not something they want in their food supply. And my own personal thing about GMOs is not that they might be dangerous, but I think when you're genetically modifying food to, for instance, resist certain pests, you don't know the long-term consequences of that. You know, what insect populations might be wiped out, and what might that trigger down the road. And the other thing is, a lot of these companies, the seed companies, are now producing seeds that are sterile, so that, you know, years ago a farmer would save some of his seeds when he harvested the crop to plant the next year's crop. Farmers can't do that anymore. These seeds will not germinate. They have to be used as food sources, and then the farmer has to go back to the company and buy new seeds next year. So that's another way that a few people are controlling the actions of a lot of people. We've turned much of modern livestock production into a destructive, cruel, and dangerous nightmare. And I don't know, has anybody seen a cattle feedlot anywhere? Have any of you? Yeah, we drove through the panhandle of Texas about 10 years ago, and on the interstate, we're driving right past these cattle, and I'm just horrified by what I'm seeing. It is just unimaginable how these animals are treated. And if any of you have ever visited a chicken farm here, we have a lot of those in North Carolina and this part of the country, that's even worse. So, you know, that's been a real problem. We continue to lose soil, and we degrade our topsoil at rates beyond what nature can rebuild. You know, if you're using organic practices, you're rejuvenating the soil as you go along, but when you're dumping chemical fertilizers on, you're not doing anything to rejuvenate. Underground water for irrigation is rapidly disappearing At one time, we had big reservoirs of underground water throughout the country, and those have been largely depleted, and a lot of it in the West. And we're seeing now there are starting to be battles in the West over who gets the water. Do the farmers get it? Do the city residents who want to water their lawns get it? And I think that's going to be a more frequent thing, that we're going to see these fights over water. She says that nitrogen overload is wreaking havoc on the environment, and the overuse of land and other destructive farming practices are moving us toward Earth's sixth mass extinction. And I think, we've all heard about the big animals, the polar bears, the white rhinos, the animals that are disappearing. But I have noticed in my own backyard, insects are disappearing. I used to have, I've planted a lot of pollinator plants in my yard, and we used to have tons of butterflies and honeybees everywhere. I haven't seen a honeybee in my yard in probably 3 years. So, when you start to see, and the insect species, everything is built like a pyramid. If you wipe out the insects, then the next higher animals up the chain go, and eventually the whole thing collapses. So that's really a worry to me. And I think a lot of us, I remember as a kid traveling across the country by car, and every time you stopped to buy gas, you had to scrape the bugs off your windshield, and wash the windshield. And how many of you have gone recently anywhere, to Greensboro, to Montreat, and gotten home, and how many bugs do you see on your windshield? That's not something that is common anymore. So there is, there are a lot of ramifications of these things that are happening. And then to end on a little bit of a lighter note, John, if you'll do the healing steps, we see more people more farmers trying to farm ecologically, using natural compost, not depending on so much on the pesticides and the fertilizers. We're seeing more people choosing organic. Pretty much every grocery store in their produce section now has a section for organic vegetables. And I know that there's a lot of controversy about whether those are really organic or not, because when you have two farms next to each other and one is dumping pesticides and the other one isn't, is it really organic? Because that stuff is in the air and blowing back and forth. Schools are offering healthier choices. If we remember back to the 1980s when ketchup was a vegetable, that is no longer that's no longer a case. My grandson goes to a Title I school in South Carolina where all the children get free breakfast and lunch every day. And the school has a website, has a Facebook page, and I can go on and they post the menus. So I can look at what he's eating every day at school. And it does seem to be a little healthier than what my kids were eating when they were growing up in the 80s and 90s. So I take some optimism from that. Local farmers markets are lessening food's travel time, and we're fortunate here in this area. We've got right across the street the Davidson Farmers Market, which is a great way to buy vegetables. We have community-supported agricultural CSAs, which partners consumers with farmers. And I know there was talk a number of years ago about setting up a CSA system here in town, And I don't know that that has ever really happened. Someone at our discussion at the beginning of the month said that they thought Barbie Farms was doing CSAs. And the way this works is that the consumers will sort of pay up front for vegetables that they'll get throughout the season. So you'll pay for a share of the vegetables from that farm, and then every week you'll get a box of food that is what's coming ripe that week. So it changes through the season. And that's a good way of giving farmers some money up front when they need the money to be planting the crops and starting out. There are food policy councils which are happening in different neighborhoods, and she talks a lot about food policy councils in Latin America. But some of that is coming to this country as well, where ordinary people are becoming involved in deciding which stores should be there, which groceries, how we can make this available to everybody. Community gardens is another thing, and we have a couple of those here in Davidson. I live in Cornelius, and there's one very close to my house there as well. And these are ways for just ordinary people that may not have space in their own yard to grow food, to rent a little plot of land and grow vegetables for themselves. We also had food hubs in low-income neighborhoods. I think everybody's probably heard about the food desert situation in some mostly low-income neighborhoods where many of the food choices are you go to a gas station or a convenience store, and that's your choice. There aren't any fresh vegetables. It's junk food, anything that comes packaged. So those are all things that might be seen as signs of hope, that we're maybe seeing a little bit of improvement in the way things are. Okay, I'd like to go back now a little bit to those hidden resources that are plowed into our steaks. The 2,500 gallons of water, the 20,000 calories of energy cost, the soil erosion and the import dependency. Did any of that surprise you? Yeah. Yeah. And she didn't, in the book, she didn't really, she just kind of mentioned that 20,000 calories of fossil fuel for a pound of beef. And I started thinking, in fact, I think someone asked at our last discussion, well, how do we figure that out, you know? And so I looked up, went online, and roughly 1,000 calories for a pound of beef. So that gives us an idea of the ratio of how much it takes to produce the beef and what we're actually getting out of it. Do you see any of these hidden resources happening in other things other than meat? Is there any, can you think of anything else that we use all the time that might?
Almonds are one of the worst uses of water.
That's important to say that.
Almonds are one of the poorest uses of water. I know that. I think more so than even beef.
Yeah, you're right about that. That's a big problem. And we don't think about these things. The first thing that came to my mind was plastic. We use plastic in everything, and we never think about how much fossil fuel, I mean, plastic is made from fossil fuel, so you've got that to begin with. Then you've got the energy that goes into producing the products, and then you've got the problem of it hanging around for hundreds of years. It just doesn't biodegrade. You end up with it floating in the ocean or sitting in a landfill, and we don't think about those costs. We're only thinking about what it costs to produce it to begin with, and then afterwards, what happens. So that's an issue. She kind of boiled the whole problem of a lot of our problems down to power concentrated in the hands of a few people. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's...
Just raise your hand and I'll bring over a mic. Sure.
Yeah, this is more of just a comment. I am in the chemical industry, and I most recently have been in ag, but prior to that was in home and laundry and personal care. And my experience was it's not as much the large food conglomerations, but the retails that purchase from them and the stranglehold that the retails, such as a Walmart, might have on driving the prices down. So it becomes, to what you said earlier, the vicious cycle. And we have to think about, it's actually our choices to shop at these very large retail organizations that might seem to be offering lower price, but what are you trading for the quality? But yet, if you can't afford, a smaller, more local, organized food group, that's the only option you have. And I say all of that to say that I agree with you. I think it's in the hands of a few, but it's not the hands of a few just in the food organizations or just in, fossil fuels, et cetera.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
There was another hand up. Did you? Yeah.
My comment was going to piggyback actually off what Lacey said. I think it's, yes, large corporations. I think a lot of it has to do with our convenience culture, wanting what we want when we want it at the cheapest possible price, and people don't understand how expensive those cheap items are. And it's not just in food, it's in, fast fashion. Buying a $2 shirt on Amazon is really expensive. And so I don't think people understand that just kind of in the whole ecosystem is really off balance. But there is a lot of control at the top, and there's a lot of people that can't afford to buy a local, item like Lacey was saying. So I don't know what the answer is to that other than, all of us do what we can with what we've got and try to spread the word. But I think corporations need to have a little bit more consciousness as they operate as far as not just relying on shareholders and profit, but think about the human and ecological cost of what they're doing, for sure. But then people that have means, like us, trying to balance some of the decisions we make, being more conscious as well as far as kind of everything we make, or everything we spend our time and money on.
Yeah.
So the thing that all the hidden costs is very surprising, but the thing that I always think about with the food is the obvious stuff, the packaging, and just how, in comparison to this, the amount of energy that's used for one meal, that packaging that just gets thrown away is very small. But that's the packaging is what I always think of, because that's the most tangible thing. The one thing that we just, and it was not me, it was Haley, the laundry detergent, now she gets the one in a cardboard box that's a dissolvable sheet. And so then you can, the cardboard is not as bad as the big plastic bottle.
Right.
But, for food, how do you do that? How do you get the food packaged safely?
Yeah.
I guess vegetables probably don't need as much sanitization or hermetically, you don't have to hermetically seal a cabbage you know. But yeah, that was just my little thought on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
One more thing, too. I feel like we've lost the reverence for our planet, just in general. We've lost reverence for human beings, for life, for soil, for vegetables. We've just lost that reverence. So it's not even a thought in anyone's head anymore, really, until we start bringing the consciousness back into those decisions. But that's something else.
So I teach 6th grade at Bailey Middle School, and we just did a whole week of soil. And we did soil conservation practices. We took an erosion walk around the school to see where we could maybe possibly help and all this stuff. And just on Friday, we did I had 100 cubes, and that represented all the soil in the entire earth. And, 75% of it is underwater, right? Because it's under the oceans, under lakes and everything. And we got down to less than 2 cubes is what we use for crops for us. And so, I talked to him about how, I know, what's the kind of new neighborhood off of Robert Walker, West Branch, right? And that used to be cornfields, right? And I talked to him about, but how many of us have ever lived a farmer's life, And they were like, only a few hands. And I'm like, what does a farmer do? And they're like, well, they wake up early at like 6 a.m. They don't go to bed. I was like, exactly. And I told him, I said, and how can you blame a farmer that, a developer comes to you with $5 million, I want your land, what would you do? And they're like, take the money. And I'm like, right. So, it was just kind of more realization for them, too, of going, we're decreasing ourselves of being man-developed on things with this kind of stuff. And I had one girl just that morning throw out an apple, and I kind of underwent on her, and I was like, and about how we just throw away things and we don't even think about it. And I said that apple could have been a whole week's worth of food for another person in another country, and they're all like, oh. So I try to bring the realization for them. So I'm trying out there. I really am.
We need you out there. Thank you. That's great. Yeah.
Did you ever get your...
I think one thing, we as consumers make choices that drive a lot of things like soil loss. For example, we all love fescue grass, except for me. Fescue grass has almost no wildlife value. It consumes people water with potable water that has been treated by Charlotte Mecklenburg for people to drink, that's safe for people to drink. You put it on your grass. That has no value. We grow corn for ethanol, for our ethanol added gasoline, using millions of acres and billions of gallons of water so we can burn it to go up in the air. We choose to do this. We allow, through not lobbying for folks, to be able to do this. If you go back and look at companies, we as consumers, and in some cases as shareholders, drive those goals and targets for corporations. Corporations have lots of sustainability programs, and some of them pretty darn good. Some of us work in industry and have worked in industry for all of our careers. So I think these are things that we have to think about. You've got to educate the kids. That's step one, so that they understand what's the cost of some of these items that we use. We just need to be mindful and think about those things.
Along that line, I remember, after World War II and into the 50s, people smoked like crazy. And it was, I think, what teachers in the schools taught the children, the young children at that age, that made the difference, so that people are very conscious of the effect of smoking. That's just one example of how putting the idea to a young child can make an adult wake up.
Other comments, experiences, concerns? Yeah.
So my mind is definitely affected by, we've watched on repeat the movie Newsies, 1899, paper boys revolting against Hertz and Pulitzer, abusing child labor laws, which didn't exist. So of course I'm like in that mindset. So, you know, even if we wanted to like revolt or stage a comeback, like we wouldn't even know where to start. You know what I mean? Yeah, like where do we even start if we wanted to make our voice heard, you know? So that's a question. I don't have any knowledge, just like the quandary of like, where do you even start other than like in your own family choices? But is that enough? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's such an important question, and I want to make sure you all leave with this handout on single-use plastics, because it's just being aware. Like, I love the story of just using those sheets in your laundry. And so we have the single-use plastic, and I didn't even notice it before, but it just holds things that could have been in cardboard. And the damages, not only to the earth, but to our health, are shocking. And this is research taken out of PubMed in 2022. So it's a big concern. So it's just being aware, just waking up and being aware. And I love everything that you've said so far. This is really important.
This is about the sheet that's going around to Connections. I sent it out in our update, and I'll send it again because there were a lot of great hyperlinks that you passed on to us.
I'll have another suggestion. We have a lot of food waste in this country, too. I think that's a big problem, and there's a few ways that you as an individual or a family can address that, too. Obviously, like not buying more than you need and kind of those obvious ones, but there's also nonprofits and programs that target that. There's an organization called Misfit Markets that you can buy to purchase the rejected food from grocery stores that aren't as cute, that it doesn't really sell in grocery stores but are perfectly wonderful and healthy, so that's an option. There's also a nonprofit that helps, you can take the waste from restaurants as well, wasted food from restaurants, and I can give that to you, Haley, if you want, and send it out. I can't remember what the name of it is. But I think that's another topic as far as. I'm not aware of that, because I think about that always. Yeah. So there's some, like I have friends who pick up the waste at Harris Teeter and take that somewhere, but I'd love to know of others. Grant?
The other thing that, just let me get this in because that goes along with this, is Crown Compost. I don't know how many of you are aware of that, but we send everything from this kitchen, that the peelings and the residue of the vegetables goes to Crown Compost, and it is turned into compost. It's a company that they started with a pilot project, and I'm not sure, Pam, can anybody sign up for it now?
Yeah, it's permanent now, and Davidson.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, come and do the.
Well, I'll talk real loud.
Here.
I'll talk real fast, yes.
Pam, talk
Here,
into the
here,
mic, it goes
talk.
to Zoom.
I know. Okay, you can get the bins free from the town. It doesn't cost a dime, and it all goes to Crown Compost. Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Or maybe you could get, well, yeah. But I also have 2 big compost bins right on my yard.
Yeah.
And I just put it in and rolled it and then have the compost just, so it's wonderful when you have vegetables and you cut off those things on asparagus that you don't eat. You're not wasting anything. It's all going back into the ground. It's a great. What happened to the mic? Where's the mic?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to respond to your original question. Is everything driven by inequality, right? And I would actually say no. I think it's an important factor, but the dynamics that drive environmental contamination, destruction, are deeper than that, because it's a basic kind of collective action problem and specifically tragedies of the common, which Garrett Hardin talked about also 50 years ago. So even if you had a very equal society, you're still going to have tragedies of the commons. So, because there's a sense that, there's this commons there that if I don't, take advantage of it, someone else is, and it's going to get degraded.
Graham, what's the phrase using tragedies
tragedy of the commons. And Garrett Hardin proposes two solutions to this. One is regulations, and one is private property, right? So thinking about like cattle commons in England in the 16th century or whatever, and then they fenced it, right, to protect the commons that was getting degraded. The other option is for government to come in and regulate. And in the last 20 years, Eleanor Ostrom said, no, there's a third option, which is community-based collective action or commons management. And I think that is one of the most sort of relevant to our, I mean, we can all go lobby state governments, local governments, national governments, et cetera, to work on this stuff, but, and we can also take care of our own, try to be responsible consumers. But we can also work together to create norms in our communities, in our churches, in our town, in our college, that sort of try to establish the kind of things that you're talking about, like and about 10 years ago at the college, I started a group with students and some staff called the Responsible Consumers Club, where we would get together and we would talk every month about different products. And so Matt would research something, he was interested in milk. What's the most sustainable milk solution? Sally would research the most responsible laundry solution, right? And then they come back and share, right, with each other, and you argue, debate, well, actually, I think it's this or that, and then you make progress at a very local level, and it's very tangible for you and for your family, right? You can get your kids involved in that research. So that's another idea.
Okay. Along with what you just said, I'm just going to read this little piece in the book that really stood out to me. If the solution to needless hunger lies in the redistribution of decision-making power, we must become part of that redistribution. That means exercising to the fullest our power to make choices in our daily life. In part, taking ourselves seriously means taking responsibility for how our individual life choices either sustain or challenge the anti-democratic nature of our society. So that's kind of what you're saying. We need to get down to the grassroots level and work together. I think that's another thing that comes out of this book, is that she's talking about working in community. You make your individual choices, but you also need to work with the people around you to, and I think your consumer education thing is a great way to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, nobody else is raising your hand, were they? Well, I think another thing that just popped up, kind of along the lines of like reverence for the land, we as individuals this is an overgeneralization, but as humans, we kind of take for granted the things that we have, the people in our life, until we're faced with a loss, and then it comes really clear what our priorities are, who's important to us, having that gratitude for what we have, having more love and reverence for what we have. And I just feel like part of this is this kind of dynamic on a collective level of like, are we really not going to do that big of a needle mover until we're faced with some huge loss as a collective? And that's kind of my inclination. Yes, I think our collective consciousness is coming together as far as how important these are, and we can kind of see the loss coming a little bit, but I'm not sure. I mean, I'm hopeful, but I'm not sure we're going to really move the needle until something is really, like, a large part of us is faced with a huge loss, at least the ones with the power and the money and all that.
This is just a personal plug. Connections people, as you're tossing out great ideas, if you wouldn't mind, after you leave here, to maybe just shoot me a text or an email with your thoughts. I do try to reflect and send a follow-up, but sometimes I don't glean all the right things. And then I can send it on to Pam, so if she wants to share with Covenant. So just on your Sunday afternoon, when you're having your afternoon tea and relaxing with your children, playing quietly, just send that on to me. Thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah. So this goes, I think, very well with what Peter was talking about this morning, about realizing that there is enough. We're always wanting more, and like the first thing that school teachers taught us when we were kids about recycling, the 3 R's: reducing, reusing, recycling. And I think there's like, oh, well, which product can I buy that's going to be better for the earth, the body, or spirit? But really, the first R was always reduce, and then we always move on past reduce. And I think that can be like a lot of it. Like, do we need another fill in the blank thing? But if you didn't hear Peter's sermon, it was really good. So go back and listen to that.
Some of
Oh yeah, there's a preview. No spoilers.
I just want to make a quick comment that this book looks like it's a big book, but this much of it is recipes for plant-based menus and kitchen tips for eating well on a small planet, a note on organic foods, preparing rice, different flours you can use, and then recipes, many recipes. So we've hit the first part of the book today about why we should be eating more plant-based diet, but then she goes on in the second half to tell you exactly how to do that. So.
Are there any other comments, experiences, questions? This has been a great conversation. Thank you, Donna and Alice, who left for choir. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate the wider audience.